They'll scroll through their phone in the middle of the night, hoping to see your name again. They'll check your profile without interacting. They'll play old conversations in their head and wonder why the energy suddenly died. But this time, you're not coming back. Not with a text, not with a second chance, not with your usual apology that always arrived before theirs. You didn't block them, you didn't beg, you just stopped showing up. And that silence, that clean, disciplined silence, is now louder than anything you ever said. Because you always made it easy. Easy to come back, easy to be forgiven, easy to take you for granted. You were the one who kept the bridge from burning, even when they kept tossing matches. But something in you shifted, not out of rage, not out of ego, but out of exhaustion, out of growth, out of clarity. You realized you were trying harder to be understood than they were to understand you. And suddenly, you had nothing left to give. No dramatic goodbye, no explanations, just distance. And now that you're no longer reaching out, they don't know how to reach in. Your absence has become a mirror. It reflects what they refused to see when you were present. Your loyalty, your patience, your effort. Now, in your silence, they hear everything they ignored. They replay the moments where they thought you'd never leave, and finally understand. You did, not with noise, but with intention. And it'll haunt them, not because you hurt them, but because you healed without needing them. Because you chose peace over proof. Because you're not seeking closure, you became it. Let them sit in that space. Let them ask questions you no longer feel the need to answer. Let them wonder why the person who would have gone to war for them just stopped trying. Drop this in the comments if you're done explaining your worth. I stopped trying. Now they question everything. Number 1, you showed up real and they played pretend. You weren't performing, you weren't calculating your words to keep things interesting. You weren't trying to win anything. You were present, raw, and honest. You showed up with intention, not strategy. While they were busy keeping it casual, you were building something that could have lasted. While they waited to see who would fold first, you were already committed. You didn't come to the table with games, you brought clarity. And instead of meeting you with the same energy, they kept their cards hidden, hoping you'd lower your hand to match their comfort zone. At first, you questioned yourself. You wondered if maybe being emotionally available was the mistake. If maybe your consistency made you look desperate. If your loyalty made you look weak. But now you understand, what they ran from wasn't you. It was the pressure of being seen. Because when someone is used to shallow waters, deep presence feels overwhelming. They couldn't keep up, so they pretended to be confused. They made it seem like the timing was off, or that they weren't ready, but truth is, they just weren't capable of offering anything beyond the surface. They wanted love without accountability, connection without responsibility, warmth without depth. You didn't ask for perfection. You asked for effort, and they gave you hesitation. You brought structure. They brought chaos. Not because they were evil or cruel, but because some people don't know how to handle real. They mistake solid ground for pressure. They confuse patience with weakness. And when it finally hits them what they lost, they'll call it a miscommunication. But you know better. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And for a long time you suffered imagining what you could have done differently. But the truth is, no version of you, no matter how edited, how silent, how strategic, would have been enough for someone who wasn't ready to be real. You didn't lose them. They lost their chance at something genuine. And now, as they scroll through people who only give them pieces, they'll remember the one person who gave them everything. Not out of fear, not for attention, but because that's who you are. You were real. They weren't ready. Drop that in the comments if you've made peace with the difference. I was real. They weren't ready. Number 2. You stopped fighting for someone who surrendered first. You were always the one extending the hand, the one willing to talk it out, willing to stay up late just to make things right. You apologized even when you weren't wrong. You tried to understand silences they wouldn't explain. You carried the weight of 2 people hoping they'd meet you halfway. But slowly, the silence got louder. The energy got colder. They stopped showing up emotionally, and you started questioning why you were the only one still holding on. And then it hit you. Not all exits are loud. Some are slow. Some happen when someone starts pulling away in quiet ways and hopes you don't notice. They gave up before you did. They just didn't admit it. They withdrew their presence but left the door open. And you, still holding on to what used to be, kept trying to fix something that was already abandoned. Every unanswered message, every excuse, every half-hearted moment, it was their way of checking out without saying goodbye. And you felt crazy for caring too much in a connection where they already stopped trying. But the moment you saw it for what it was, the moment you stopped blaming yourself for the silence, was the moment everything changed. You didn't stop fighting because your love was weak. You stopped because your self-worth grew stronger. You finally understood that love should never be a battlefield where only one person is showing up. And that realization, that painful clarity, was the most honest form of peace you've ever felt. You didn't walk away in bitterness. You walked away in truth. Because if someone isn't willing to stand beside you when it matters, they don't deserve to walk beside you when it's easy. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." And what you chose to be was whole, not half, not stuck in someone else's indecision. You stopped chasing someone who let go a long time ago, and that was not weakness. That was growth. Because real strength isn't about holding on tighter, it's about knowing when to release what already let you go. So no, you didn't lose them. You chose yourself. You chose clarity over confusion, peace over pleading, worth over waiting. And if that choice ever haunts them, let it. Drop this in the comments if you've made the shift. I didn't lose them. I chose me. Number 3, you got tired of proving what was already obvious. You gave them loyalty without being asked. You showed up when it was inconvenient. You listened when they were silent. You stayed when it would have been easier to leave. You weren't perfect, but your effort was real and consistent. And still, they treated you like you had something to prove, like love was a test, and your consistency wasn't enough to pass it. You kept showing them with your actions what your words couldn't carry anymore, but they kept looking for reasons to doubt what was right in front of them. That's when the shift happened. Not in some big dramatic moment, not with screaming or silence. It happened in you quietly, slowly, and with finality. You realized that if someone could receive your love and still question it, the issue was never your effort. It was their ability to recognize value. And you stopped trying to convince them, not because you stopped loving, but because love shouldn't feel like a constant argument for your own worth. You grew tired of explaining what should have been felt, tired of repeating what should have been obvious. You started to understand that some people don't see clearly until they lose what was clear all along. Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." You gave them more than most ever would, but they kept craving what didn't exist, thinking something better was always waiting. And now they'll sit with that craving, with the absence of what once was consistent, grounding, and real. Because your love wasn't something that needed proving, it needed reciprocation. And now that you've withdrawn your presence, they'll finally feel what they chose to ignore. You no longer explain. You no longer convince. You simply exist in your peace, and that peace is louder than any apology they never gave. If they ever come back looking for the version of you that stayed long after the pain started, they won't find them. That version retired, quietly, without ceremony. You didn't walk away to prove anything. You walked away because you had already proved everything, and it still wasn't enough for them to choose you. Let that sit with them. Let your silence echo where your effort used to live. Drop this in the comments if you're done convincing people to value what they couldn't see. My worth isn't up for debate. Number 4. You stopped explaining yourself to someone who never listened. You tried to have honest conversations, not to win, not to blame, but to understand and be understood. You opened up, exposed your hurt, lowered your voice just to be heard, and still nothing changed. They nodded but didn't absorb. They replied but never reflected. They treated every dialogue like a debate, every concern like an inconvenience. Over time, you realized they weren't listening to connect. They were listening to defend. And you weren't being heard. You were being dismissed. That's what makes it worse. Not the arguments, not even the silence, but the knowing that your pain was heard and still ignored. You kept trying because you believed clarity could heal it. But clarity requires both people to care. So you did the only thing that still held dignity. You stopped explaining. You stopped defending feelings they refused to respect. You stopped breaking yourself into smaller pieces just to fit into a space that never made room for you. Now your silence speaks, and ironically, it's the only thing they seem to hear. Because silence doesn't ask for attention. It demands it. It creates space for reflection and sometimes regret. You didn't stop speaking out of spite. You stopped because you learned that not every voice deserves your truth. Seneca once said, "One of the most beautiful qualities of true friendship is to understand and to be understood." What you had wasn't friendship, wasn't partnership, it was performance. You gave them scripts of vulnerability, and they treated it like background noise. And now, there are no more lines to read. You left the stage. You reclaimed your energy. The same silence they once ignored now surrounds them, and it's louder than anything you could have ever said. That silence is full of every conversation they didn't take seriously, every attempt they brushed off, every moment they refused to grow with you. You didn't go silent to punish them. You went silent because there's nothing left to say. And that's what echoes in their mind now. Not your words, but the absence of them. You stopped explaining yourself not because you gave up, but because you woke up. If they ever cared to really listen, they would have heard the truth when it mattered. But now, your peace has the final word. Drop this in the comments if you're done wasting your voice on deaf ears. I stopped talking. My peace speaks for me. Number 5. You healed in silence while they chased distractions. While they jumped from one temporary high to the next, looking for something to drown out the echo of what they left behind, you sat with the discomfort. You didn't run. You didn't numb it with new faces, cheap thrills, or meaningless noise. You stayed with the ache until it taught you something. You asked yourself the hard questions. You stared down the moments that broke you. And in doing so, you didn't just survive. You transformed. They tried to skip the pain. You let it change you. They posted like everything was fine. You woke up every morning and faced what didn't make sense. They reached for anything to avoid stillness. You embraced the silence until it became peace. While they kept pretending they were over it, you were busy becoming someone who no longer needed closure. You didn't heal by accident. You rebuilt, brick by brick, while no one was watching. You learned to enjoy your own company. You found your focus again. You set boundaries that didn't shake. And now, they don't even recognize you. Not because you became someone new, but because you finally became who you were meant to be all along. Their distractions didn't deliver peace. Yours did. They're still trying to outrun the silence, trying to replace what was irreplaceable. But you carry yourself with quiet power now. Not bitter, not vengeful, just clear. They don't know what it took for you to be this still. They don't see the nights you wrestled thoughts that screamed in the dark. They don't know how close you were to giving in before you decided to grow through it instead. What they miss now isn't just your presence, it's your depth, your consistency, your calm. And the worst part for them? They can't reach you anymore. Not because you blocked them, not because you hate them, but because the version of you they once knew doesn't live here anymore. That man healed in silence, found peace, and walked away without needing an audience. You became someone who doesn't beg to be understood. You don't try to prove how far you've come. You simply let your presence, or lack of it, say everything. Drop this in the comments if you chose growth over noise. I healed, they ran. Number 6. You became what they never expected. A man who lets go. Not loudly, not dramatically, just fully. They thought you'd always orbit their world, that no matter how much they pulled away, you'd come running. They got comfortable with your loyalty, took your effort as routine, believed the pattern would repeat forever. But one day something shifted. You didn't yell. You didn't demand closure. You just stopped showing up. And that silence? It hit them harder than any confrontation ever could. Because when someone finally lets go, not to hurt but to heal, it's a different kind of power. You didn't let go because you stopped caring. You let go because you finally started caring about yourself more. You realize no amount of effort can reach someone who chooses to stay emotionally unavailable. No amount of love can fill a space that was never meant for you long term. And the man you are now, he doesn't chase, he chooses. You became too grounded to be manipulated, too focused to be distracted, too self-aware to keep proving yourself where you're not seen. What they never expected was for you to grow so silently that one day they'd turn around and not recognize the man they lost. A man who no longer waits. A man who doesn't reopen doors just because someone knocks. A man who understands that letting go isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the kind of strength that comes from learning when to walk away without burning bridges or leaving scars. You don't need revenge. You don't need recognition. You just needed distance. And now that you have it, peace followed. They expected the old you, the one who'd chase even when tired, who'd explain himself even when unheard. But that version, he evolved. And what really shakes them now isn't your silence, it's your indifference, because nothing haunts someone like the realization that the person they once had is now completely unavailable, not physically but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You didn't disappear. You outgrew the space they offered. And now they're left to wonder how they lost someone who gave them every chance, only to finally choose himself. Drop this in the comments if you've outgrown the old story. I let go. I leveled up. Number 7. You stopped being available, and they finally noticed. Not when you were pouring your time into them. Not when you were showing up after long days, replying within seconds, or checking in when they didn't ask. They didn't notice the loyalty when it was always there. But the second it disappeared, the silence was deafening. Suddenly, your absence became more noticeable than your presence ever was. Now they scroll through old messages, replaying moments you've already outgrown. They wonder where you are, if you still think about them, if someone else now gets the parts of you they took for granted. But you're not the same man who waited for their attention. You don't send updates to people who made you feel like a burden. You don't offer emotional access to those who treated it like background noise. That's not you anymore. What they feel now isn't your rejection. It's your discipline. You stopped giving to the same place that drained you. You stopped being available to people who didn't know what to do with your presence. You became harder to reach, not out of pride, but out of protection, because you learned the value of your energy by watching how they misused it. Now, they watch from a distance, wondering how you became so quiet, so distant, so untouchable, but they missed their moment. They were so used to you being around that they never imagined a day would come when you'd stop trying. And when that day arrived, it didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, with peace, with power, and with a man who finally knew his worth. Your discipline is louder than any words you could say. You don't need to post. You don't need to react. You just need to keep doing what you're doing, growing in silence, healing without permission, and staying unavailable to people who couldn't show up when it mattered. The truth is that your availability was a privilege they didn't respect, and now that it's gone, they feel the loss everywhere, because once you take back your attention from the wrong hands, you become unforgettable, not because of what you say, but because of what you no longer offer. You don't owe them clarity, not now, not ever, not when they made you question your worth, not when they acted like your love was replaceable. They made their choice in silence. Now they get to live with yours. You don't send final messages. You don't check if they're okay. You don't explain how much it hurt. That part of you, the one that needed answers, is gone. And what's left? Stillness, strength, the quiet confidence of someone who no longer begs to be seen. Because now you know, closure doesn't come from them. It comes the moment you stop arguing with reality. You don't need revenge. You don't need attention. You just need discipline. And that's what you've built. You walk past what once wrecked you without a second glance. You speak less because your peace says everything. So don't go back. Not for closure. Not for comfort. Not for curiosity. Stay done. Let them stare into the silence they created and realize they'll never get access to the healed version of you. If this message found you in your quiet comeback, subscribe. Because this space isn't for the ones who explain. It's for the ones who rebuild in silence and never look back.